Today, I'm going to be talking to someone who is an expert and an educator in narcissistic trauma and abuse. And I'm very curious about this myself. But not only is she an expert in that, she's an EFT practitioner, but my mentor. She's my mentor in EFT universe. I am a student of that as well, even though you might see that I have been doing some practicing of my own. I've been learning a lot from Niko Ana Jeanne. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be your mentor. I'm
Thank you.
very honored to be your mentor.
Likewise. Yeah, so I've been learning a lot from Niko, but I really wanted to interview her because not only have I had questions about people that have either dealt with narcissism in their, earlier stages of their life, but are dealing with things right now in the moment. And it's actually interesting. We were talking before. It's kind of I don't know if popular is the right word, but when I look at things about narcissism on YouTube, it's big. There's a lot of videos of all shapes and sizes, but they're not necessarily coming from the perspective of someone who actually facilitates people healing in that. And that's something Niko does. And I think that's a perspective that's particularly useful because the internet is a lot of information, but not necessarily how do I actually do something about this. If it's okay with you, do you want to share why that's an interest of yours, or how that became something that you really focused in on?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was probably not until the past about 3 years or so that I became aware of, even knew what a narcissistic personality disorder was, or narcissism, or anything like that. So it's not new to me that, I've had a lot of healing to do and that I've had to do a lot of self-work, but that was new to me in the past 3 years. And you're right about how there's tons of information online, and some of it's great, some of it's not so great, but that actually is how I found out about it, is that I searched online and I started reading about it. I started doing research, which I think it's a completely valid stage of healing, is that you have to actually identify there is a problem before you can know what to do about the problem. So I did research and I realized, ooh, I might have this problem, And once I did that, then I started looking for a way to solve the problem. So, but what I would say about that is that, that is a valid stage, is research and learning about narcissistic personality disorder, understanding the signs that you might be in a relationship with a narcissist, or were in a relationship with a narcissist, because that's valid as well. It's all like that stage of learning and gathering information.
Okay.
But then there is a moment where you have to kind of switch out of research mode and actually start to take a look at, how is this affecting me? How is this affecting my life? And then what I can do about it. And that's like a whole other journey, is doing something about it, taking action.
Okay, yeah. So you obviously had that transition and then got into helping other people. And curiosity on my part too, even though I've certainly read some things, as far as someone who's in that stage, or they're someone who helps other people with different modalities, whatever they might be, maybe some of the key bullet points that make someone like a true narcissist versus just an ass.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could be both, right? Because that's a really important question, because this comes up a lot, is that there is like a pathological level of narcissism. This is just something that I've learned over time. I've done a lot of work. I've done the research. I've gotten work myself from therapists. I've read, papers that psychologists have written about this topic, and it's a fairly new topic in psychology. So it actually hasn't been until like about 2010 that the personality disorder was even added to the DSM. So it's actually new in psychology.
To be labeled a narcissist is only like 10, 15 years old.
Exactly.
Wow,
Exactly.
okay.
So, and that's kind of an issue too, because unfortunately it's not these mental health professionals' fault, but a lot of mental health professionals aren't even aware of it. And so what's happening is there's just so much information out there. And there's a lot of people who've been experiencing the trauma of being in a narcissistic relationship, a narcissistic dynamic. But mental health professionals don't always understand it and can't always identify it. And it's very difficult to know if a person is actually pathologically narcissistic or they just have narcissistic traits. Like I said, just being an ass. Like that's just a behavior, right?
Right.
But there's definitely a difference between someone that's pathological and someone that just has narcissistic traits. And that's kind of the confusion people get into. So people will always ask me, well, how do I know if they're really a narcissist?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the stage that I was talking about. It's like you have to take a moment and stop trying to figure it out, because you're not going to know. Okay. You can't know. Like,
Okay.
it's impossible to know until you truly know it in your being after you've done a lot of work around it. But the important question to ask instead is, how is this behavior affecting me?
Right.
How is this person's behavior affecting me? Is this a healthy dynamic that I'm in? Is this person able to take responsibility for their behavior? Can they own their own behavior? Are they willing to, listen to my point of view? Are they willing to cooperate? Is there room for communication, for healthy communication? So the traits of a pathological narcissist are, the main ones are that there's a very serious lack of empathy. That's like one of the biggest hallmarks of it. However, it's confusing because people can read this and then they can say, oh, they take that one trait and then they say, well, that's not the case with this person, so they must not be a narcissist.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it's a very complex type of situation where a narcissist can actually fake empathy. They can actually appear empathetic. And if it's going to suit their needs in the moment to get what they want, they will appear empathetic until it doesn't serve them anymore. That's a perfect example how learning some stuff on the internet is great, but it's not going to help you figure out if someone has a narcissistic personality disorder. Ultimately, you have to just start doing the healing work, and you have to start turning within, and you have to start understanding, is this a healthy relationship or not? Am I being codependent here? Because a narcissistic dynamic requires two people to be involved, right?
Okay, so this is interesting, and I think maybe really important. So it's almost like, if I make sure I'm hearing this correctly, we don't want to get too hung up on, are they technically a narcissist? Do they actually fall into this psychological definition? What really matters is how it's affecting us and what is going on. And therefore, it's not a drastically different treatment on your part as someone receiving the healing or giving the healing. In other words, we don't have to say, well, you're not dealing with a psychologically labeled narcissist, therefore the techniques are all different and the whole
Right.
path is different. You're saying we don't need to worry so much about that.
No, it's absolutely true, because the way to heal from narcissistic trauma is to find out what set you up to be vulnerable to that in the first place, which comes from childhood. So we have to go all the way back to childhood, and we have to find out, what experiences did I have when I was a child that set me up to have core beliefs that made me vulnerable to narcissistic abuse, such as I'm not good enough, I can't make it on my own, I'm not smart enough, things like that then allow us to be exploited when we're in adulthood, or even not adulthood, but just any phase of our life. And when you look at how narcissists operate, basically a narcissist is going to find the place where you're weak. This is how they operate. Conscious or unconscious. Mostly narcissists are very unconscious. And so they find the place where you're weak, and then they show up as the answer to your problems. Like if you have a vulnerability around, let's just say, for instance, you've got some prior relationships where you were cheated on a lot. And that's where you're vulnerable. You have a fear that someone's going to cheat on you again. And then you're dating again. And then you're in this date with someone who's a narcissist, but you don't know it yet. And then you're telling them some things. They're like, oh, I just think that's terrible that someone would do that. And I would never do that. I'm the most loyal person there is. And so they're going to show up as what you appear to need, the place where you're weak, the place where you're vulnerable. And that comes from core beliefs.
And so they're doing that, I'm imagining, with a certain level of like a skill. Like it's not just, hey, I'm a good guy, which is almost like a red flag if I were to say that to a woman. Like, hey, I'm good. It's they actually sense, you're saying they perceive these weaknesses in a way, and they adapt not only the language in a very obvious way, but actually emulate. When you're saying they emulate empathy, they are emulating the behavior of Mr. Loyal. I would never cheat on you as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're master manipulators. This is why it's so hard to detect narcissism, because they're such master manipulators, because it's a skill they've developed over time from their own trauma, that they don't even have a real self. And that's why they call it the false self. So they're living through a false self, and they can change that mask anytime, depending on who they're interacting with, what they want, where they are. And it's a skill that they have. And this is how they've survived, because of whatever trauma they experienced, they could not process, and they projected it onto their external world. And they've been doing this for so long, and they're so unconscious. That's the pathology of it. So they can walk into whatever environment they're in, and many of them are high functioning people. Sure. Like high functioning, high level. Maybe they're really good at some things, and maybe even they help some people in some ways, but in their personal relationships, or in the relationships in which they are getting narcissistic supply, they're a completely different person. And so they're master manipulators. It's a very common thing that happens, where the person that's in the role where they end up being the one being abused is going to see a completely different side of this narcissist. They may appear loving to the world or to others, but then when you're alone with them, it's a completely different person.
Okay, so that seems like it further shifts the emphasis away from what is this person doing? Are they really a narcissist? Like you said, because it's so complex, and because our minds love to do that. That's why I think maybe there's so much YouTube content around, well, are they doing this? And you can get almost lost in the discussion of who they are and how they operate and what are they doing and how do I really know it 100%? But we, I guess, need to shift that from, okay, once I know I'm dealing with something that either resembles a narcissist or is it, medically speaking,
right?
Okay, that's all the information I need. And maybe instead of researching, like you said, you hit that point where you have to transition from research to, okay, now what do I do about it? And I feel like that's probably where things are more lacking, and where we need, people like you doing the kind of things you're doing. So let's say we've kind of established that I'm dealing with someone, whether I'm not a psychologist, I can't give them the formal diagnosis, but this is going on. And I'm seeing a different side of them, and I know that there's something unhealthy here. You mentioned that it often goes back to childhood, like most things related to emotional healing. But you were mentioning this to me before, and I think it's really interesting that you were saying it's not necessary that, let's say you're the victim. You don't have to have had narcissistic parents or have had even much dealings with actual narcissists in your life in order to find yourself in this dynamic. It's just any of these, you mentioned not good enough, any of the kind of beliefs or things that get set in motion. Do you want to maybe speak a little more to what some of those are, and what some of the signposts are, the kind of clues, like, oh, okay, yeah, I have some of these programs running, even if because sometimes people are like, well, I had good parents and
Yeah.
I had a nice middle class life, and so we think maybe we're not susceptible to
Hmm.
some of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Like this is a whole can of worms. Like we could talk
Okay.
about it for a long time, but yeah, I'll try to like keep my answer brief on that. But so as far as, let's just say, I'm working with someone and they suspect that they have narcissistic trauma, but they're coming to me because they have another goal in their life that they're feeling stuck around. And so I work with transformation professionals. So typically it's coaches and EFT professionals and people who work with clients in transformation. And so let's just say they're stuck in their business. They're trying to get their business off the ground and they know that they're stuck. And we start doing the work and we start just looking, we have to look at what the present issue is.
Mm-hmm.
And then we reverse engineer it. Okay. So we look at, okay, well, we're stuck around this one thing. It could be a fear of visibility. Okay. And as you know, because you're an EFT professional, you know that the fear of visibility is based in a trauma that happened somewhere in childhood that created a core belief. Like it's not safe to be seen. If I get seen, then bad things are going to happen to me. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get punished. I'm going to get criticized. I'm going to get judged, that kind of thing. So we work with that core belief to help that person get unstuck around moving forward in their business and being seen, right? But if there's a narcissist in their life that is basically holding that pattern in place, because that narcissist, remember we talked about how they play on the core beliefs, that narcissist is using that person's core beliefs to their advantage. So if the core belief is, like say, I'm not good enough, I can't make it on my own, that narcissist wants that person to keep that belief in place because that's how they stay in their life. That's how they get supplied. That's how they stay on top. That's how they stay superior. That's how they stay in control, because they are in a dynamic with that person around the belief that I can't make it on my own. I'm not good enough. So I need this narcissist in my life, whether they know it's a narcissist or not. I need them for something. They're my resource. So guess what? Being visible is not safe because that means I could be my own resource. If I'm visible and I show up in my business and I start being successful, I won't need this person anymore. And so this narcissist is very threatened by this. They don't want that person to succeed. So this is where that shows up, that dynamic shows up. And that's how it shows up, is kind of through this investigation in the session. Is we're finding out what's the core belief, and then where are these relationships, where do they fit in to the core belief being held in place? And then that's when codependency comes out, which is a whole other thing, right? That's what we have to look at, is how are we codependent on this narcissist?
Okay, yeah. So the beliefs that we have internally, not only is someone in a narcissistic dynamic dealing with the narcissistic side of it, not wanting them to heal or resolve that, because that would be like the person building up their own armor and taking away the weak spot that they're using to kind of manipulate. So one clue, would you say, is if they're not supporting you in your own healing? Have you seen that? Do they actually like try to get people to stop working on themselves? Or
Absolutely. A narcissist is pathologically jealous. And
okay.
pathological jealousy is more than just, oh, I wish I had that. Someone else has that. I wish I had it. I'm jealous, Pathological jealousy is like, I want everything you have. I want your attention. I want your energy. I want your money. I want your love. I want like every form of energy I can get. So if they see that you are sending your energy towards something else or someone else, it doesn't even have to be someone, something else. Let's just say a business. I'm working on this business. And they're going to be jealous, pathologically jealous, because your energy is sending somewhere else. They can't get it from you because they live in a black and white world. They live in a world of you win, I lose.
Okay.
So they're not going to want you to win because they see that as a threat to the supply. It's called narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is like energy that they're getting from their environment, people, things, places, situations. And it comes in the form of whatever, that idea of like a child will, if they want attention, they'll take any kind of attention, whether it's negative or not.
Yep.
So a narcissist is like a child that they will take any kind of attention, even if it's extreme blow up, screaming, fighting. That's actually better. That's like a juicier piece of supply because it's highly emotionally charged.
Okay. Yeah, it's what's one thing that's weird as you're describing this is it seems pretty clear to me that that kind of narcissistic personality, there's a lot of things in our culture right now that actually make those people very successful. There's a lot of incentives almost to be that way. If you think about internet culture or celebrity, or it's like, if you can feed off of that, then that's going to work really well for you. So that's, I guess, an aside. But as far as resourcing someone who, okay, they've recognized they're in that situation, and now they're becoming aware, maybe they just listened to what you said and they're like, uh-oh. Some of that is happening, and like you said, they're probably pretty subtle about it at times.
Yeah.
And so, there's that sort of not always very useful cliche advice. Oh, just leave them. But not everybody's life is set up in such a way that that's even possible, right? Or even healthy. So I'm never a big fan of people like, oh, just ditch that. Well, slow down, right? There could be a lot of financial, safety, all sorts of things intertwined with that. But how do you start resourcing yourself? And I guess aside to that I say resourcing yourself, but also when do you need to go to someone like you?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I absolutely am with you on that. I mean, when I work with clients, I tell them, and this is why we do inner child work, is that we're not going to set any new boundaries in a relationship, whatever that means, whether it means leaving or just changing the level of communication, that we're not going to set any new boundaries until we've done the inner child work, because the inner child is not ready for that. And if you try to set those boundaries before you've done the inner child work, you're setting yourself up to get re-traumatized, because you're going to be going into it not from a place of being empowered in your adult self, but you're going to be going into it like a 5-year-old trying to set boundaries with someone. That's not going to go well because a child can't do that. They don't have the capacity. So that's why like in the work that I do with private clients or in my mastermind, is that we always do the inner child work first, and we go internally and we work internally before we set external boundaries. So say, for instance, I'll work with clients and we talk about what some new boundaries might need to be in their particular situation. Because like you say, sometimes it's not feasible to say, I'm just going to leave, because someone could be financially dependent on someone, or it could be a situation maybe where they're taking care of a parent that's dependent on them. So it could go the other way. It could be,
or this person's going to destroy their life if they leave them because they have access to information, they have access to who knows what, right?
Absolutely. So we have to make sure that we're protecting ourselves first. We're taking the steps like emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, all those things first before we make any changes in the external world. So it takes time, and it's different for everyone. It's completely unique for each person. Depends on the person. So I never tell clients what to do, right? I never say you should do this. I help them discover what's best for them. And it requires actually exploring what boundaries even mean, because most people that are in this situation, they don't even know what boundaries are. Because it hasn't been modeled for them, and they've been in a relationship with narcissists, in which in a narcissist world, you have no right to any boundaries. And if you were raised in a family system where you were not allowed to have boundaries, you don't even know what boundaries are. So you have to start learning, what are boundaries? Do I even have a right to have boundaries? So it's a process.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just like with all things with inner work, the age, I think of it as like the age that the energy gets formed, it stays that age, so to speak. So you can be 60, but when you come up against a certain emotion or certain situation, you are now dealing with the energy of a 5-year-old in that. So like you said, they can't, a 5-year-old. And I think that helps with the self-compassion when you start looking at yourself, because, you hear this language a lot where people are like, I should be over this by now. I shouldn't, why can't I just fill in the blank? Just leave, just tell them. Well, maybe in your mind, you think of yourself as someone who can do that. But when you get into these patterns, or you're triggered by something, or you're dealing with a certain situation, you are now dealing with a 5-year-old, and you don't help a 5-year-old by saying, shut up and just do it. You have to, you have to, but we talk to ourselves that way, right? Why can't I just do this? But you wouldn't say that to your, 3-year-old niece. Like, why can't you just set your boundaries? It's like, no, you get down on the level, you sort of teach what a boundary feels like, what that is. And so when you're working with people, you're actually taking them through that process, if relevant to them, right?
Absolutely. Like what you just described, that's actually exactly what happens in the inner child work that I do, which is called like reparenting. Literally will reparent your own inner child, just like that 3-year-old that, is upset about, something that happened in the past. And you can't expect that 3-year-old to just, in the present, who's living inside you, set a boundary in an adult relationship, because they're stuck in the past. So you have to literally learn how to dialogue with your inner child, right, which is what I teach people to do, and to go in and reparent them, as in show up as the parent that you needed, or show up as the source that you didn't have back then, and work with your inner child. And there's two things that have to happen. The purpose is to look together at the past and agree upon the truth of what happened.
Okay.
Because, we're stuck. We have trauma bonds, and it's difficult to see or admit what really happened in the past. So we go into the past together and we look at what happened together. We work, we release trauma through EFT and energy psychology. And once we can get agreement between the inner child and the inner adult, okay, this did happen. This happened. We process the trauma. Then we can bring the inner child into the present with us. And then we can see the present as it is. And so instead of the child responding to the adult relationship, the adult is responding to the adult relationship. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's how I've experienced it many times, where there is the internal sense is of a scared child. And so whatever tools necessary to create the environment for that scared part of you to actually calm down and then feel the presence of the adult. And then we are now kind of integrated and seeing the situation in a different way. So you're no longer reacting from, the scared child is no longer reacting from that. And right, what's always so interesting about that kind of work is I think of some examples with me where sometimes even that, let's call it the scared child, needs time even to adjust to your own presence. Like you can't just go in there. That's why, if anyone watches my stuff sometimes, like some even seemingly healing work can be too aggressive, because like we're trying to just fix this little kid and just say affirmations to it and do these things, and they sound very nice, right? Like, oh, I love myself, I'm going to tackle the day, but inside the energy is very scared, and it doesn't want you to come in and just tell it what to do, and you need to set boundaries, and we're going to take this course. It's like, no, you have to actually interact with that part in you in such a way that it feels safe enough to be present. And when you were saying see the past accurately, there's probably a huge validating component of that, right? Because when things happen is when you're a kid, or even now, even if it's something coming from a younger traumatized part, you kind of doubt it, right? You have doubt. Maybe it's me. I must have done that. Maybe that didn't actually happen to me. Maybe I deserve it. Maybe I'm crazy. All these things, right?
Yeah, narcissists prey on that too, because
Mm.
another tool narcissists use to keep people confused and compliant is gaslighting.
Oh,
So
okay, yeah.
yeah, so I mean, in childhood, if you were not validated, and even well-meaning parents can cause this to happen, they don't realize it, but like if a child has a feeling and they're like, I feel sad, and you say, don't feel that way, don't worry
Yeah,
about it, it's
which
fine,
is rampant,
just get over
rampant.
it, right? Even
Totally.
if the parent didn't mean, like, they're a well-meaning parent, but they just gaslit their child in that moment. Again, I'm not digging on parents here.
Right.
But if it happened in your past, if you had this happen, you were invalidated, your emotions were not validated, you weren't allowed to express them and just have them, then you're already being gaslit, and it sets you up to doubt yourself. So then you think, or like even something like, mommy's sad, mommy's crying, and you walk up and say, Mommy, why are you crying? Are you sad? And then the mom's trying to protect the child. Honey, I'm not crying. I'm fine. Don't worry about mommy. And then that child, who's just naturally empathetic and feels their mother's emotions, says, well, wait a minute, I was wrong. She's not that.
Mm.
But the mom was sad, clearly. So right there, that starts like, I'm doubting myself, even though I have an instinct about something in a dynamic, in a relationship, but I'm being told I'm wrong.
Mm.
And so then we get set up to doubt ourselves in the future. And this is a huge component of the narcissistic dynamic, is that you're being gaslit all the time by a narcissist, because sometimes they're so mentally ill that they actually believe when they say something. They actually believe you. Like you could literally be talking to them and they would say something to you. And then you said, you just said this to me. And they'll say, no, I didn't. I didn't say that. And they did. And then they actually may be so sick that they actually believe they didn't say it. That's kind of the pathology of it, although
Mm.
maybe not always. So I'm not sure how we got off on this. Maybe I'm going way off
No, no,
topic.
no.
We were talking about doubting yourself,
Yeah.
and the child doubting like their instincts in the present moment. So doubting, like having boundaries, and like, oh, you can't just tell yourself to have boundaries because your inner child isn't sure. Am I right about this? Should I be having boundaries? So absolutely. We don't want to do that to our inner child. We don't want to force. It'd be like, if like a child has a tantrum in a grocery store and they just fall on the floor, and are you going to drag them out of the store? I mean, you could. But isn't it more effective to wait for them to, kind of spend that tantrum and work with them and talk with them? So it's very similar.
Okay, yeah, so this is really helpful. So I'm just trying to think of the person who is dealing with this or thinking they might be dealing with this. So phase one is, like you said, educate yourself. But to me, what was, I think, maybe the most important part as far as how I conceptualize this is don't get too hung up on, are they technically a narcissist or not? Would they be diagnosable? Because all that really matters is, okay, I'm educated enough now to see that these dynamics are happening within my relationship or whatever relationship it might be. And then we go to resourcing in a kind of safe and tactical, for lack of a better word, way of, this is not a behavioral fix. This is not, say this to a narcissist. Well, you see this horrible advice sometimes of like, just say no or whatever, just try to change your behavior in some way that.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible advice. Awful. Awful.
But you could see how people who don't have a lot of exposure to these ideas of like healing within, that becomes your only option. All you can do is try to act differently. I'm going to try to say this to my narcissistic partner. I'm going to try this. I've had people come to work with me who, because they just didn't, for lack of having any other strategies, are just trying. I tried to tell them this. I tried to tell them that. I'm like, I don't think any strategy of changing what you say is
Mhm.
going to actually, you're not going to find the right thing to say that suddenly breaks this apart. It has to go into shifting from how do I tactically handle this
Mhm.
being to what are the, so you said beliefs, traumas, as you know, these are all interconnected, but um, some I think resonate with people more than others. Some, if you say trauma or body, they don't know what that is. But if you say belief to some people, this who are more cognitive about it, these thoughts of like I'm not good enough, I deserve what I'm getting, or I am causing this.
Yeah.
You discover those.
But you know what, I don't mean to interrupt you, but let's go back, because actually I think this would be a better way to explain it. Let's go back to what you said about wanting to change yourself in order to interact with the narcissist better. And I think that right there is why you need why. Ask yourself this question. Why are you trying to change yourself in order to interact with this person better?
Hmm.
That's the real question.
Beautiful. Yeah. The fact that you're even asking that shows a whole paradigm, right?
Why are you trying to change who you are so you can make this person comfortable or make them act the way you want them to act? And that's really where codependency comes in. But if you can ask yourself that question, because sure, it's a coping strategy. And I mean, I get it. I've used it. I've done it. And sure, if you need to do it to keep yourself safe,
Right, right.
do that. But that's not the answer. That's not healing. That's like putting a Band-Aid on like a bleeding wound just to keep it, yourself from bleeding long enough to run to the emergency room, but it's not a sustainable strategy. So the question is, why am I trying to twist myself in a pretzel to be what this person wants me to be when they're going to change the rules anyway? So that's another thing narcissists do, is they're always changing the goalposts.
Right.
So
Right.
one day they'll tell you, okay, I want you to be like this in order for me to love and approve of you. And then the next day they're like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? I didn't say to do that. Or, they're going to change the story on you, and it makes you crazy. And the more you try to twist yourself into what they want you to be, the more you lose your true being, your authentic self, the farther and farther away. And the more you're betraying your inner child, and the more you are re-traumatizing yourself over
Mm.
and over again. I know I'm being truthful. I know that's not what some people want to hear, but that's the truth of it.
But you also may have just saved someone 20 years of a loop that
Mhm.
you're all of your mechanisms to try to escape, which are very understandable and very human, right? I'm going to try to change my behavior. I'm going to try to say this. I'm going to try to fix myself, but not in a healing way, but like become who they want me to become. And you don't necessarily even know you're doing that. So yeah, so the answer from what you've actually experienced working with people, which makes total sense to me, is that you have to provide this sort of safe space and this healing work to those parts of you that a narcissist dynamic are feeding off of. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like, because I've been in my mind, I've been thinking virus. The way you're describing this sounds a lot like a virus in the body.
Yeah.
And by removing these, you're removing what it feeds off of.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
as you heal these sort of core beliefs and working through some of the past traumas, which was interesting, you said, regardless of whether they were caused by narcissists or not,
Mm-hmm.
they're just setting the stage, just like in your body, you've set the stage for a certain virus to kind of enter. And now
Mm-hmm.
it's feeding off of these things, these sugars, right?
Right.
And you're using these tools to say, okay, forget trying to manipulate the environment,
Mm-hmm.
heal what it's feeding off of. And then is it sort of like a virus where they have to just find another host because you're not giving them what they
Yeah.
need anymore.
I'm glad you asked that, because I was just thinking when you described, I love the virus metaphor, because what happens when you start killing a virus? Like when all of a sudden it gets worse.
Yeah, they're going to fight hard.
They're going to
stay
start fighting
alive.
harder. So if you take away a narcissist supply, they're going to flip out.
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
that's when you're going to find out. Like that's the thing I tell people is like, if you really want to know if someone's a narcissist, start putting boundaries in place and see what happens. Just sit back and see what happens, because a person that's not pathological, maybe they've got some narcissistic traits, but somebody that's not pathological, they may have some bad behavior, but if you put a boundary in place and you stick with your boundary, eventually that person, if they're healthy enough, is going to start responding
Mm-hmm.
in a healthy way. They're going to respect your boundaries. And you're going to know, okay, this person is respecting my boundaries. There is some change here. I am seeing a willingness to maybe take responsibility, or a willingness to work on this, or to listen, or find a way to cooperate and connect. But if you put a boundary in place with a narcissist, they're going to do a couple things. They're either going to flip out on you, they're going to come at you like crazy, or they're going to ghost you.
Okay.
They're going to ghost you. So it kind of shows up in different ways. But either way, you're going to know something is off here. Something is off. So that's the practice. You keep putting those boundaries in place. And the longer you do this, the more evident it will be as to what you're dealing with. And then while you're doing that, you're going internally. I call it the healing container.
Okay.
So boundaries create a healing container. You go into the healing container, you start doing your inner work. And so you focus on you, and that outside of the boundaries, whatever's happening out there is none of your business. And that's the difficult part, is letting go of that.
Because you're going to discover after they start ghosting you, if you are drawn back to that. And that means now you might think, oh, great, they finally left. But there's likely going to be some part of you that's going to be, now what? And then that's going to bring up different things that might need to be worked through, right?
That will reveal what needs to be healed, because yes, we're addicted to that pattern. We're addicted to that dynamic. It's like drugs. It's, and so then we'll go through a withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
And we will literally have withdrawal symptoms from being abused.
Amazing.
We're craving it. And
Amazing.
it's a part of the healing process. It's normal and natural. And if you don't have support through this process, it's very difficult. I just want to tell people that, like, if there's one thing, please don't go through this alone. Please get some kind of support, whether it's from myself or anyone else out there in the community that's doing this work. Do not go through this alone. That's the worst thing you can do, is isolate yourself.
You said you have a mastermind, right? Which sounds like a good idea, because it's other people who have been through this or are going through this at different stages. And oh yeah, I remember when they did that to me, and you're kind of able to bounce off.
Yes, the mastermind is like a hybrid. I have a course, and then we have live events. So, we go through the course content where we're learning about all this stuff. And then we get on live events and we do group healing, group tapping. People ask me questions. We share in the community about what we're going through. Yeah, we get validation from other people that, hey, no, it's not okay. That behavior's not okay. Oh, all this time I didn't even realize that this behavior was happening. So it's about that validation and that support, and that other people are going through this. Like, you're not the only one. And that in and of itself is super powerful, is realizing you're not alone. Because that's the power of, like, abusers want to keep you isolated and keep you separate. They want to keep you alone because that makes you weak. It makes you doubt yourself when you're alone.
And human beings are so adaptable that things become normalized. Yeah. So, just like you could probably live a pretty long time eating like Snickers and whatever, and your body will sustain. And if you forget what actual, nourishing food is like, you can go a long time. And then when your body does get something healthy again, it's like weird, and there's withdrawal symptoms, like you said. And so you need this kind of, especially if gaslighting is a common technique, you need other voices saying, no, this is the real world. Like, this is actually healthy. Like, they have you in a spell, and it's going to take some, lifelines to kind of keep pulling you back. And human beings get addicted to everything, emotions, situations, even if they're not healthy, which is fascinating but useful to know, I think, because like, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I wanting to go back to this? It's not your fault. We can get addicted to literally anything because we like the familiarity, and the nervous system maps territory and says, okay, we understand this environment, even though this is an abusive relationship. We know how to survive in this, and it wants that.
Exactly. Yeah, we understand the guilt and the shame, and that's all we know. Absolutely. And we need someone to say, no, the Snickers is bad for you.
Right.
Like, no, I need the Snickers. It's not that bad. And you need someone to say, no, this healthy food is healing you. And then eventually your body will, like, I love that metaphor. Your body will crave the healthy food and won't even care about the Snickers. The Snickers won't even, in any way hold your interest. You'll forget about Snickers and you'll go on and enjoy the healthy life. Forget by eating healthy food. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing all that. So if people want to, well, you have a YouTube channel too that
I do.
People can walk through different tappings and get more information about this, right?
Yes. Yes, I have a YouTube channel. I've got a website, and I'll give you all those links, and you can have.
Okay, cool. So those will be in the description, and your name is on the screen, so people can type in your name and get to the YouTube channel. And of course, you do one-on-ones with people as well.
I do. I have a very small practice. I do privates, and then of course the group mastermind. And I also have a course for EFT professionals, and of course on learning how to work with your clients doing inner child work using EFT.
Oh, great. Cool. Yeah. Well, yeah. So a lot of people who check out this kind of material will be interested in several of those things, I'm sure. So yeah. Thanks again for doing this, and thanks for being my mentor in the process, and for answering a lot of my questions I've had about this for a while. And I'm sure this is going to help people who come across your work and then can continue working with you. So.
I hope so. I hope it helps someone. And then thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed discussing this topic with you. It's been great.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks. All right, everyone, take care, and check out the links in the description.
Bye.